Everyone. Welcome to today's live webinar presented by Trak-1 on residential or tenant screening and what every landlord should know about reducing risk with their property or properties. And as people are coming in, we'll just give you a minute. We have people continuing to come in the door. I'd like to thank you for deciding to join us today on this topic, and we appreciate your feedback from our previous webinars. They're very helpful for us as we strive to bring greater clarity and understanding to equip you in the roles that you play in your business. My name is Rick Coltman, and I have the honor of introducing our experts on today's topic in residential screening, and they include Mr. Matt Graham, Vice President of Operations here at Trak-1, as he also leads our technology team in developing some of the best practices in customized background screening solutions. Matt is a regular contributor to our webinar series. And then we have our special guest today, Valerie Campherdam. She's our national sales consultant out of our Louisiana office, and she is really a true expert in residential screening, and Matt will give more and greater detail on her background so you can understand the depth by which she comes to us today. So Matt and Valerie, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, we're actually really pleased to have Valerie on this presentation. She does bring a wealth of expertise to this. She's our go-to person for anything that is relating to our residential business, and a lot of that experience was gained in the front lines as a property manager. Valerie won't let me tell you how many years of experience that is, because it is a lot. I mean, it's talking a lot. 10 years of experience in the front lines as a property manager. So she knows really that other side of it, really understands the client perspective, and that is really helpful for us to be able to provide top-notch services to our residential clients. So very, very happy to have Valerie on here.
Well, thank you, Matt.
Yeah, great to have you, Valerie. One reminder before you get started, Matt, let me ask those that are attending this webinar today and participants, if you would take time through the chat feature, which you'll find on your screen. If you have any questions as we move along through this presentation, we'd love to hear from you. Just put your question up in the chat, and we'll try to respond throughout the presentation. Okay, Matt, it's yours.
Thank you. So there's been kind of an evolution over the years with respect to property management and landlords and what they're doing with background screening. We've seen things go from running very simple credit reports, and really even prior to that, just making some phone calls and making a few inquiries about their applicants, to the more robust nature of the background screening scene that we're seeing now. I think Valerie can kind of comment on that as well. But really, when you're talking about background screening, it's kind of all-encompassing. We understand that most of the landlords and the folks that are owning the properties are looking to protect that investment from a financial standpoint, because it is troublesome to evict someone from an apartment. That process has gotten far more litigious and far more complex, and it does tend to drag on, and that can really impact a property manager's bottom line. So one of the key areas of interest is making sure that the person that you're bringing into that property, that unit, is going to be able to afford it and maintain that and provide you a steady stream of revenue. So the credit reports are always kind of at the top of the list in terms of the interesting criteria. But just as important as that is making sure that a criminal element doesn't enter into your property, because that can have an adverse impact on your ability to market that. Once you kind of become known as a bad neighborhood or a bad property, that really kind of reduces your resident pool, and just kind of almost kind of becomes a downward spiral of not being able to attract quality tenants. So what do you think, Valerie, from your perspective? What has kind of been the trends that you've been seeing with the background screening?
I agree with you, Matt, on the communities spiraling downward if they're letting criminals in to their properties. I've had some specific properties here in Louisiana that were not doing a thorough background check. Criminals are friends with criminals. They let them know where they can get into an apartment community. So they'll go and apply there because they know that they're not going to find out that they're a criminal. Once they started using a broader search with a nationwide and doing local searches, They found more criminal records in 30 days than they had the whole previous year. It slowed their traffic down a little bit in the beginning because they weren't known anymore to take those criminals, but it really turned around their property and the type of clientele that was coming to rent apartments.
Great. And so, we've just as we've seen an evolution in the types of screenings that are available out there, so too have there been there's a lot of different options out there for running background checks. One of the things that we as an industry are trying to do is eliminate some of those fly-by-night websites that pop up and say they can run any search on any person, instant, be back in 30 seconds or less, swipe your credit card, it's $5, $10, $13, whatever. It's very easy to fall into that trap. Again, being conscious of the bottom line, you're trying to reduce the amount of cost per unit, and you do look for those cheaper options. But as you said, if you're not doing a robust search, if you're looking for that easy as 1, 2, 3, those cheap background sites, you really do see the drop off in quality. And so one thing that we try to do at Trak-1 is educate our clients as to the pitfalls of kind of doing it yourself and relying on some of those internet-based sites. They're not following FCRA guidelines, and that can get you as the user of those services into trouble as well. So while they may be tempting from a dollar standpoint, you really get what you pay for, and so it's important that you don't fall into that trap. Valerie, you've probably seen quite a few customers as they come to us. You know some of the things they were doing in the past to screen their residents. You have any anecdotes or any stories about people that were maybe doing it themselves, using internet sites, and the difference in quality that they saw once they switched over?
I think the main thing that I've seen is a lot of property management companies want their results back instantly, and when they come back instant, you're missing criminal records in some states specifically. So what I've found is to kind of get away from that mentality. If someone shows up at your property at noon and needs to move in same day, there might be a reason why that they need something that quick. So having to wait just 24 to 48 hours for a criminal background check is worth the wait to ensure that you're not moving any criminals in your property.
Now, as a property manager, in your experience, I mean, I know it's difficult to have somebody walk out of your office when they have money in hand, so can you share anything about the value of just maybe being a little more selective? Any stories come to mind from your past?
Well, I think what you do is you let your applicant know that. You let your applicant know that everyone that's moving in is going through the same process, the same criminal background credit check, so that you can ensure that you are moving in quality residents, that their neighbors aren't going to have a criminal background. So if you can kind of spin it as an amenity that maybe you're some properties down the street are moving people in no matter who they are, that they would want to move to your property because you are screening to the best of your ability.
So adding or taking that selectivity approach and making that more of a feature than a drawback. I like that.
Absolutely.
That makes good sense. Well, so we talked about some of the pitfalls of using these fly-by-night organizations, and one of those is their lack of adherence to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And I'm going to make a little bit of an assumption here and not go into the full depths of explaining the FCRA. We've got other webinars in this series where we've done that. So I'll be willing to bet most of you, or at least have heard of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Now, some of you may think that this applies to you because you're running credit reports. Well, that's partially true, but it's not the complete story. As we've covered in the past, the Fair Credit Reporting Act actually covers all types of background checks, even those that don't involve accessing a credit report. So the Fair Credit Reporting Act is a little bit of a misnomer. So with that understanding, you need to know that because you are accessing a background check through a third party, that does subject you to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And that's not a big deal. honestly, people worry about that, and they start wringing their hands over all these different hurdles that they're going to have to go through. But my guess is even before you started looking at credit reports and background checks, you were probably doing some of these the same things that are required of you under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So I don't think that you're going to be too troubled by the restrictions. However, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, probably more so in the employment context than in the housing context, is becoming kind of a hotbed of litigation, and we're finding a lot of employers being sued for not being able to follow some of the more technical provisions under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And there's at least one of those that I think landlords should be reminded of, and that's the adverse action process. But we'll talk a little bit about that. First, what I'd like to do is kind of show you some of the situations where the Fair Credit Reporting Act actually applies. So a couple of scenarios where they're probably very familiar and very common to you because it's what you're doing every day. One of the ways that landlords will fall under the Fair Credit Reporting Act is when you're reviewing that initial application for housing. So most of you have, as part of that screening process or part of that application process, running through the background check. So that in itself right there brings you under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. If you are making that part of your leasing criteria and it is involved in your leasing decision, then the FCRA applies. Valerie, do you have anything to add on the concept of this initial application? Have you seen any kind of changes or developments over the years and how this process works?
No, I just think that it's real important to know the rules and regulations under the FCRA, to be getting consent for your applicants, and to make sure that you're only running applications for people that are renting an apartment. So as long as you know what the rules and regulations are, and like Matt said, we do have webinars on that. I think it's very important to be educated on it.
And does that apply to the co-applicants as well?
Correct. Anyone that is going to be a leaseholder at the apartment community.
Great. So another situation that maybe it's less common, but it's still something that I think the folks should be aware of is, let's say somebody has moved into a one-bedroom apartment and their life circumstances change and they're growing a family and they need to move into a larger unit. So larger unit means more obligations, so you may want to go back and verify that the current tenant is able to afford that and move into that, and situations haven't changed within their personal life, no additional criminal activity that's maybe gone undetected by you. So if an existing tenant is going for a different unit, that may be another situation where an additional background check may be run.
Correct. Yes. I think it's important to make sure that they still qualify, especially if they're going to a larger unit. Maybe they're going to be, getting married, or they just want a roommate, to make sure that they do qualify, especially on the credit-wise, because the rent-to-income ratio will be different. But again, on the criminal aspect as well, I've seen it time and time again where an applicant or a resident wants to move, and their new applicant, the property just does a criminal background, and come to find out they've been, evicted from other properties. So it's best to run the whole report again if they're applying for a larger unit.
Good advice. And so we're going to look at a few of the things that are encompassed in a probably a typical background check for most property managers. There's a lot of different things that you can look at in terms of determining a resident's fitness for lease, and so we'll take a look at some of those. One way you can determine an applicant's ability to pay, or kind of their financial responsibility, is looking at their check writing history. And there are services that Trak-1 has access to and can incorporate into the background check that will look for checks that are written with against insufficient funds. Banking industry uses a term of NSF, non-sufficient funds. You may have heard of these. You heard these referred to as a hot check or a bounce check. Any of the terminology is pretty much talking about the same thing as somebody writing a check that they couldn't cash. So one thing that you can incorporate into the background check is this concept of a check writing history, and any evidence of financial mismanagement that pops up in the form of these bad checks, that can be a helpful criteria in determining whether or not they're going to be a good financial risk for you.
Mm-hmm. And in my experience, this is a good tool. Even if someone can have good credit and pass your credit criteria, but still have bad check writing history. So if it does show that they have bad check writing history, it could be that you would require this specific applicant or any applicant that shows that to pay by money order. So it does reduce your risk there because going into it that they have that habit of writing the bad checks.
Yeah, some people tend to avoid credit. They may be avoiding it because they can't get it, and then so this is a good way to find those folks that even though the credit might not show anything, that this is still evidence. So yeah, great point. So the rent-to-income ratio, that's a really good measuring stick. You see this not only in the apartment context, but what you can afford in terms of a mortgage. And kind of a good rule of thumb that I think is out there is no more than a third of your income going to housing. And so the rent-to-income ratio, as that number improves, obviously that's the burden of that lease check that they're writing every month is less of a draw on their overall financial picture. So that's a good number to see whether or not they're overextended and likely to potentially get into trouble if they've overextended themselves.
Right, and one of the things that I tell when I'm training my new customers is qualify them before you take their money. Qualify their income before you process their application, because if they don't make 2.5, 3 times 3.5, whatever your criteria is, they don't make that money, then they don't qualify from the very beginning. So it doesn't matter if they're a criminal or if they have bad credit, they can't move in because they don't make enough money.
Right, good point. Eviction history. If there's any tool that's invaluable to a landlord, it would be this, I think, in that if they've already gone through the process of eviction with another landlord, that's a pretty good indicator that that's a risk for you going into this particular situation. So, and it's not just the people that have gone through the complete eviction process and had their belongings, taken to the curb, but it's even going through the process of having an eviction filing, because as a lot of landlords have experienced, as soon as you enter into that process, all of a sudden they come up with the money because they don't want to be totally kicked out. So we have the ability to look at both the eviction filings and those evictions that have gone through a complete disposition of eviction.
Yeah, and in my experience, recently in the last few months, I have a lot of the properties here in Louisiana have started filing evictions with the Justice of the Peace instead of going to the courthouse. If you're doing that, just remember that the Justice of the Peace does not have to file with the courthouse. So your evictions may not ever show on someone's eviction report. So my advice would be, if you file with the Justice of the Peace, once the eviction is complete, either ask your Justice of the Peace to file it for you, or you can take that paperwork down to the courthouse and file it so it does go on their record, because you don't want them to be able just to go rent apartments wherever they want because it's not showing up.
Great. And what are some of the methods that we've developed to detect those Justice of the Peace evictions?
I'm sorry, say that again?
So if that's being the case, if
Mhm.
the justice of the peace is where those evictions are being filed, and those are not showing up with the eviction history search, how would a landlord uncover those? How can Track-1 help a landlord uncover those?
Well, what I would recommend is to make sure that you have a collection agency that you're turning, if they are leaving owing money, turn them over to a collection agency so that does pull on their credit report. I again have just encouraged the owners and property managers to take initiative to file those with the court because it's the only way that we can pull the information. And a third thing would be if someone is doing a rental verification at your property, be honest. Don't just fill it out without looking at their file because you don't want to send someone to another property that was, not a good resident for you.
Right. And one of the ways that we've kind of looked at that is, we do have the ability to, most of the background checks you think in terms of a criminal history, but we also have the ability to search the civil record as well. And a lot of times things will show up in the civil record that have to do with financial issues where they've been sued or they have had some sort of action taken against them that might be useful. So we see it less often, I think, with residential context, but that's just keep in mind that is another way we can do some additional searching. But probably the most common, as everyone thinks of once they move past the credit issues, is the criminal history. And this is where we have a variety of things at our fingertips. Track-1 has developed a proprietary database of criminal records from across the entire country. Now, of course, I won't claim that we have every criminal record in the country because nobody has that. There may be one place where every criminal record in the country exists. It may be on Edward Snowden's hard drive somewhere, but what's typically out there and available, I always tell our clients in a straight up manner that it's like a very nice block of Swiss cheese. It has holes in it. And that's where we come in and go beyond just those fly-by-night organizations that have these criminal databases. We can supplement those criminal databases with additional searches. And this is where I think if you haven't gotten to the point in your background check program, I would really have you consider going beyond that national database search and add in the county criminal searches, because the way that the criminal justice system works is these records really do begin, they originate in these county courthouses. And that's going to be the most current, most up-to-date, most complete place to look for criminal history. So these county courthouses will often report up to a state-level repository, and the state-level repositories eventually make it into the way to these national databases. But really looking at a county criminal house or county courthouse record is the best place to look. And one of the things that's a little bit unique about Louisiana, where Valerie is based, is there's a parish-based system there. So Track-1 is uniquely positioned to be able to offer parish-level searches too. And so I really think that that's something that you can do to supplement that national search, because again, even though our database is one of the best out there, we have probably at this point about 800 million records, but really more important than the number of records, because there's a lot of companies out there that will try to wow you with their record count. It has more to do with the number of sources. And Track-1's database at this point includes over 1,400 sources across the country. So that helps reduce the number of holes in that beautiful block of Swiss cheese. Valerie, do you have anything to add about the parish searches in Louisiana?
Yes, absolutely. As Matt was saying, we do have, one of the best nationwide database searches. But in Louisiana, we only have a handful of parishes that report to any database. So that's why it's important for us to search the local parish that your applicant is from. This is going to, like Matt said, pull the most up-to-date information. And we don't want you to miss that. You want to do the best possible search that you can do. Again, this is where your turnaround time comes in, where it may take, most of the time it's same day, but it can take 24 to 48 hours. We do We do train the staff on when the best time to enter those reports are so you can get them back faster. But it is very important, especially here in Louisiana, to run that parish level search.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point too, Valerie. I just was thinking about other ways that our national database search that we call the broad screen is different from other companies. Is one of the things that we do once a record comes up out of that database, we call it a hit. Once that hit comes up that's tied to your applicant, we go a step beyond what's required, and we verify that hit, that criminal record, with the original reporting jurisdiction. So one of the challenges with relying upon a database search alone is the fact that there is a lag time in which these records are entered into these databases. And so in the intervening time, that record could have changed. In some cases, a record could be expunged, and you're no longer legally allowed to be making decisions on it. So it's important to be able to go back with the original reporting jurisdiction and find out that, one, it still exists, and two, the information that came out of the database is current, complete, and up to date. So the idea is that you want to make sure that the information is complete and accurate. And so by us going through and validating and reporting the most current information, you're assured that those database searches are as good as they can be.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with you, Matt, there. I know that there are some companies that provide their national database search, and anyone in the United States with that name is what you're going to get. So you have to go through it and try to figure out who is your applicant, who's not your applicant, which can be very hard to do. And with our broad screen verify, we're taking that extra step and doing that for you, so you don't have to go through that trouble.
Exactly. So in addition to the criminal history, other things that landlords can rely on from our reports is looking at the either paid or unpaid collection amounts, and specifically those that are owed to other landlords. And so when you have an amount that's been past due, and if the relationship, the former leasing relationship, has ended with another complex, and there's money still owed, that's certainly an indication that they may not be as a good of a risk as somebody else. And you can make a distinction between amounts that were at one point owed and then have been paid off versus amounts that are still outstanding. I guess one is a little bit less critical than the other, but still it's indicative of the financial behavior and things that you may need to be concerned about as the prospective landlord.
Right, and I totally agree with that. It kind of goes back to the evictions too. The eviction filing may not have been followed through with. They may have came in and paid, but if someone has 6 evictions filed, then that is a reflection of their payment history of that property. Same with the paid or unpaid collections. Most property management companies do give their residents or previous residents time to pay off any balances. They're not going to turn them over immediately. So I would definitely take this into consideration and use this as a tool to check more rental history than they provided, because I would probably imagine that if they left owing another property money, that's not the property they put down for you to check for their rental history.
Yeah, absolutely, good point. So once you've decided what you're going to include in your package, and I think all of these items are really something that form the foundation of a good, robust background check for a landlord. Once you've selected that, and once you start using those, there's some things, as we mentioned, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act that you really need to consider. So once you get the information, it's really important that you restrict access to these reports. So only those individuals that need to know and need to have access to the information should have access. That means locking those up in a cabinet in the leasing office, or wherever these reports are being run, they need to be restricted. For those of you that are familiar with the on-site visits that are sometimes required when you're setting up an account, you'll have somebody come out and inspect your property, making sure that you have locking filing cabinets, making sure that it's a secure area. The credit bureaus are the ones that are really imposing those requirements because they have to be very careful about information, and the threat of identity theft is real out there. So making sure that you lock up the reports, and then what's becoming increasingly important is understanding what your obligations are when you're making decisions based on a consumer report. And that means avoiding any type of discriminatory behavior. Most landlords are already familiar with their obligations under the Fair Housing Act. There was a recent Supreme Court ruling, very recent, in fact, June 25th is when it came down, that is going to have a significant impact on this. But before we jump into that, I'd give Valerie an opportunity here to comment on the obligations that landlords have when using these reports for leasing criteria.
Right. What the main thing that you would want to do is just to be consistent. No matter who your applicant is, whether you know them, whether or not you feel comfortable with them or uncomfortable with them, if you use a scoring model like we have, then you're ensuring that you're going to treat everybody that walks in the door the exact same, no matter your feelings. And one of your obligations is to make sure that you follow all fair housing laws. Everyone knows, the basic fair housing laws, but they are, forever changing. In Louisiana, we did just have a new protected class come about a couple of weeks ago, where domestic abuse victims are now a protected class. So just make sure that you're educated, with your local apartment associations on the fair housing laws, the national fair housing laws, as well as your local fair housing laws. And if you do decline someone based on information that we provide for you in the consumer report, that you are providing them with a copy of the adverse action notification. We do provide that for you. It's very simple to print out. It pre-populates your applicant's information, but it does give them the right to get a copy of their report if you decline them.
Yeah, very important. And as we mentioned earlier, we alluded to some of the adverse action requirements. The fact that we do have those letters that you can print out really makes that process streamlined, and it's as simple as printing out the report. You can print out that letter at the same time. So meaning if you do decide to decline a lease to someone, that you are obligated to inform and if it's because of something that was in the background check or the credit report, you are required to inform them of that, and give them some steps to follow to potentially, if there was a problem with the report, if the report was inaccurate in some way, giving them an opportunity to correct that information. So you'll find more about the adverse action process in some of our previous webinars, and Valerie also alluded to a scoring model. That was the subject matter of one of our most recent webinars. We went into the detail on all the different computations and different variations of what goes into a scoring model, and those are just very popular in the residential context. So Rick, I think at the end, can provide us some more information about how to access some of those previous webinars, because that's one that the landlords certainly don't want to miss. But we mentioned the Supreme Court case that came down on June 25th. It was a 5-4 decision, and this was an issue that had been attempted to make its way to the Supreme Court on a couple of other occasions, but through a variety of circumstances, mostly political, those cases were encouraged to settle prior to obtaining a final decision under the Supreme Court. Mainly because I think at the time the thinking was those decisions would be unfavorable based on the current presidential administration's viewpoints. I think landlords were expecting something or hoping for something a little bit better in this case, but What happened here, and the main impact of this Supreme Court ruling, is that the concept of disparate impact analysis is now applied to housing cases. And so this is something that's been around forever in the employment world. It goes back to cases that I even studied in law school, Griggs versus Duke Power. But what it amounts to is, when people think of discrimination, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the concept of disparate treatment or a direct discriminatory intent. I'm not going to lease this apartment to you, or I'm not going to hire you because you're, let's say, African American. And so that's a direct cause and effect. The intent was there, the action was based on it. It's very clear that that was discrimination. What's less clear is situations that fall into this disparate impact analysis, which means you had a facially neutral policy, and it had a disparate effect or a disparate impact on a certain segment of the population. So what that means is there was no real discriminatory intent, but there was a discriminatory outcome. So it's focusing on the effect of the policies rather than the actual intent. And so what that means potentially in the housing context, and what landlords now need to be concerned about, is what's the effect of my background check policy? What's the effect of my leasing criteria? If the impact on that is the failure to lease to a protected class, then you have to go back and look at those policies and determine if there's anything in those policies that's causing that. So let's take background checks, for example. It's very possible that because of the incarceration rates of African Americans over whites or Caucasians, that by running a background check, you may be denying leases to more African Americans than not. And so is that a discriminatory impact? Well, I think if the statistics bear that out, I think one could say yes. So you're not now looking at the intent, you're looking at the impact. Fortunately, though, there's a defense in these situations, business necessity. So I think if you can demonstrate that there's a legitimate business interest in running a background check on individuals or running credit checks, and I think there's a pretty clear case that there is, because I think there's a pretty clear case that credit is directly, has a direct impact on one's ability to afford something like a lease or a car or a house, whatever. So I think you can draw that distinction, you can draw that connection. The question then becomes, is there any other way that you could do that would have a less discriminatory impact? And again, I don't know that there is in this case. I think that background check is probably going to be something that can be defended. The challenge now is that you have to mount that defense. Whereas before, the strict reading of the Fair Housing Act did not allow for this type of analysis. There had to be discriminatory intent. Now I guess the can of worms has been opened, and so I think it's probably going to take a little bit of time before background checks are tested under this new theory. So we'll see what happens, but I think until then, landlords are probably advised to continue doing what you're doing with background checks. But I think it's very important that you remain consistent, as Valerie said, in the application and the usage of these background checks. You can't let the nice, upstanding, straight-laced looking white person slide on something that you wouldn't allow the same person if they were African American. You have to remain consistent in your application and your leasing criteria. That's why I think the scoring model with its built-in recommendation system is probably a good way to go. But until then, I think we're just going to have to kind of wait and see the overall impact of this Supreme Court ruling. But it is something that I think you should become aware of.
Yes, and I agree with Matt that it's something that if you don't have any information on it, that you'll want to contact your local association, just become educated on it. But the most important thing is to stay consistent in your rental process.
Yeah, so it was the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs versus Inclusive Communities Projects. That was the Supreme Court case, and you can it's making its way through the news cycle right now. So if you put in Texas Department of Housing Supreme Court, you'll probably find it very easy in your favorite search engine. And so to kind of wrap things up, we've talked about some of the different ways that the FCRA becomes applicable in these situations, and pretty much the second that you're ordering a background check, that's triggered. So whether it's credit only or criminal only, it doesn't really matter. You're going to be looking at the FCRA. Valerie made a good point and indicated that you really need to be obtaining written authorization to get this information. While it may not be strictly stated in the FCRA, a lot of times when you're accessing the credit report, there are other laws and regulations that do make that a necessity, and it's just the right thing to do. I mean, there's no reason to be running these types of background checks in secret without the applicant's knowledge and permission. Just a very, very good best practice to be obtaining the authorization in advance. And then especially if you are taking action, which you wouldn't be running these background checks if you didn't plan on using them. It's very important that you do follow the process of notifying the applicants that a decision was made based on the background check, making sure they have adequate opportunity to respond, know that they notify them that they have the right to dispute, all the things that are available in the adverse action letters that are provided for you in the Trak-1 system. And then, just as we mentioned with this Supreme Court case, just don't be surprised, is like employers have had additional scrutiny drawn on them for quite some time now. I think you're really going to start to see some increased scrutiny on your background check policies, and really they're going to make you want to prove that a background check is important and necessary for the operation of your business. And so I would start building that case now, and just make sure that you're prepared for any additional scrutiny that comes down the road. Valerie, any closing thoughts from you?
No, I think you pretty much summed it up. Again, we're here if you guys have any questions after the webinar, and if you're ever concerned about the legalities of declining applicants, accepting applicants, that you would want to just notify your corporate office, check with your legal counsel, and check with us, and we can recommend things for you to do.
Great, thank you, Valerie. I really appreciate your insight. Having somebody that's been on the front lines, it's really, really great to hear, and you brought a lot of value to this. Appreciate your participating.
Thanks, Matt.
So Rick, tell us what's coming up next, and don't forget to remind people of how they can access some of those previous webinars.
Absolutely, Matt. Again, Valerie, thank you. It's great to have you on here. Matt, always do a great job. And coming up next, now, this next one is going to be August 13th on resume verifications. Now, this may become important to those of you who have lots of employees that are at your properties, but I would also ask that as you receive emails throughout the next month from Trak-1, that if you know friends or business colleagues in your local marketplace that could benefit from some great education on resume verifications and the importance of doing that for hiring, that you would get the word out to them. Also mentioned, if you'd like to listen to our other webinars that we've done in a variety of areas, you can go look through the list. If you take the website, www.trak-1.com/webinars. You can go there, see a list of webinars in our webinar library, and pick out the next one you'd like to watch and listen to, get up to speed on. Again, thank you again for everyone who came today to be on the webinar with us. Thank you to Matt and Valerie as our subject matter experts. And from the whole team here at Trak-1, we say thank you, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.